All right, we're back here this week to give you the North preview of the NUIC. And Shane, we got a lot going on this week. We have obviously last week we brought forward the South Division preview. This week we're bringing the North. And as we've seen over the last 4 years, the NUIC has won 4 consecutive state titles, with Lena Winslow winning their 4th title in 10 seasons last season. Once again, as we enter 2021, Lena Winslow is expected to be the favorite here yet again. And as we stated last week, the NUIC showed a lot of parity last season, except for Lena Winslow, who obviously won the 9th state title among the North Division teams since 2003. And the North has dominated the South, and even last year as we went back to a North-South split, the North won the crossover games 14-7. So last week we identified that this number looks to increase this year as the North strengthens while the South looks to regress a bit. The superpower of Lena Winslow, though, will seem to drop off a bit too, which should make more competitive games as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's... you drop off from the level at which they were at. I mean, they're still, you're still top dog, even with the drop off. And to touch back on, your North and South, I mean, it's basically been a continuation of when it was the Northwest against the Upstate. We call it different names. I mean, you have a little shifting here and there of a couple teams, but it's pretty much the same dominating features.
Well, and you go back to that Northwest Upstate shift to the North-South, and really the 2 teams you're losing theoretically are Forreston and EPC, of which Forreston has been 2 of the state champions over the last 4 seasons. Outside of that, the last time we saw EPC win a state championship was their lone season in the 2014 year. And then in the 2018 season, the last year, the Northwest Upstate Division split, was the last year EPC won the conference championship when they went undefeated in the regular season.
Right, and then, the North gained Orangeville and Stockton. It's kind of shifted. I mean, you're losing EPC and Forreston in that division. I mean, ultimately should make the South a little stronger, but when Orangeville and Stockton are both quality programs now again, it makes the North still strong.
Right, and you take a look at the Northwest Division Conference, I'm sorry, I keep saying the Northwest.
I got you.
I know.
You all messed up.
I know, you did. When you look at the North Division Conference and you take a look at the past conference championships since 2001, and you look at Dakota leading the way with 9, and then Stockton with 8, Lena Winslow with 8, and then you have a severe drop-off because then you have Galena at 3, East Dubuque at 2, and you have Orangeville in there with a conference title since 2001. And these are just teams in the North Conference. Now, whether or not they won those conference titles, whether they were in the North Division, South Division prior to the Northwest Upstate split, that's still looking at the whole conference since 2001 when it merged into what is now the NUIC.
Right, and I mean, but if you were to back up a little bit, I mean, it's been almost 10 years since, you've had Dakota or Stockton or Galena, East Dubuque, and Orangeville actually win anything as far as the conference goes.
Right. Yeah,
so, I mean, it's been a while.
You're correct. I mean, if you take a look at the 2010 decade, it's pretty much been dominated by Lena Winslow. And then at the beginning of the decade, you have Stockton and Dakota that were pretty dominant still at that time, with Dakota winning a conference championship in 2010, Stockton winning championships in 2011, 12, 13, and 14, and then again in 16. But when you look at where you're at in state championship presence, it's all Lena Winslow there. But as we move forward into the look of the North Division, obviously, like we said, Lena Winslow drops off a bit. We're going to start to see different teams, as you stated, Stockton, Orangeville, and the presence and arrival of what is now the Du-Pec Rivermen. So we're going to break down every one of these teams right now. First team we're going to preview here in the North Division is the East Dubuque Warriors. East Dubuque finished the 2019 season at 2-7 and 0-6 in the North Division. Obviously, Shane, the Warriors are another team going through a coaching change, as we talked about last week. This time it's Coach Terry Breitbach who is stepping away from the position, and former Lena Winslow quarterback and Orangeville assistant coach Joe Edler is taking over the reins as the head coach at East Dubuque. And since leaving the Upstate Division back in 2014, East Dubuque has struggled to provide winning seasons. Their last playoff appearance was in 2013, and their last winning season came their last year in 2014 when they went 5-4. The last time they even won 4 games in a season was in the 2015 season, or 2016 season. I'm sorry. With a highly skilled and talented junior class mixed with a good senior class, will the Warriors make an unexpected leap that can bring back the stirs of echoes of the 2000 season where they went when they last made the semifinals?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it'll get to that point, but there's definitely some key returners there that, East Dubuque, I think, can be very competitive and maybe even win some games that a lot of people think they shouldn't.
I would agree. I mean, you take a look at where we had them at in the preseason poll, and our preseason poll did not favor East Dubuque at all. We had them finishing at 0-6. But like you said, they returned 1,619 career yards. And when you have big players in Declan Schummel and Sam Huntington coming back, and you add in the play of Will Kiefer and Dawson Fyan, and you have some upcoming juniors that are going to play a presence with like Sam Bowman, Ben Montag, Ben Tressel, Connor Miller. These guys are going to create a good impact for the Warriors on a skill level basis.
Yeah, that's really all you need. I mean, and in such a shortened season too. I mean, things can be weird. I mean, you're already going to be out of your element a little bit here, but to back up a little bit on that 0-6 prediction, I would be more surprised if they went 0-6 where instead they could win a couple games. I would be more surprised if they don't win more.
And looking forward, I mean, based off of our predictions that we put out here a couple weeks ago, back on February 16th, I would agree with you. As we start to break down more of what the East Dubuque Warriors are, we start to see another landscape opening up to what the 2021 season is going to look like with schedules, teams that aren't going to be able to play in week 1 now because of COVID concerns, and you start to look at overall talent at the same realm, you're looking at an East Dubuque team that can definitely turn the tide on what they've done in recent years. And like you said, they got the right skill set to be able to take that side and move it forward. With that, you take a look at like Declan Schummel. Very key player, but last year, he got injured, and that created a big downside for what their offense could be. And now with being a senior, I mean, he comes back with 484 yards and 6 touchdowns, so he's really a key contributor to what the East Dubuque offense has coming back.
Right, and I mean, that's where we're at with all this. Especially in a year like this where you're going to have things such as maybe a kid can't play or you get a couple kids and next thing you know the whole thing's shut down. Whereas last year you did see an injury and that can change the whole landscape of things, really.
Exactly. So when you look at like Will Kiefer, he brings back 201 yards rushing with 276 yards receiving, 4 total touchdowns. And then you got a guy like Sam Huntington, and that's somebody who we saw have a big game against Orangeville back in 2019. But he finished the year with 181 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns and another 75 yards receiving. You had Cade Kohler with 121 yards rushing with a touchdown, and Dawson Fyan, like we mentioned before, with 212 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. You have good guys there, and then you add in the likes of Brevin Lee. You add in offensive linemen and Connor Miller, Ethan Sheehan, Justin Sertle, and Charlie Breitbach. now you got a little bit of a team that you may be able to develop, and then even there too, you have Thomas Mai, who might be able to be a contributor on both the offensive and or defensive lines.
Right, and that's going to be key for the Warriors, is that run defense and how the line play really plays out.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at what East Dubuque has done over the past few years, that's been their biggest breakdown is line play. We know that they have key athletes. We've mentioned that they've had a lot of athletes over the years, and you see that when you translate what they do on the football field to the basketball court and the baseball diamond, and you know that basketball and baseball, they're a big team in the NUIC and across the state, right? But when you go to the football field, they're very underperforming. So it's not the lack of talent that they have; it's the lack of execution and the lack of size. Where can they develop that? And that's going to be on the offensive and defensive lines, as you brought up there. So we'll see what they have here. Next team we're going to cover are the Galena Pirates, and Shane, Galena finished the 2019 season at 2-7 and 1-5 in the North, and a once storied program as the Pirates has landed on tough times as we've seen them with losing records over the last 4 seasons. Since their last playoff appearance, the Pirates have only won 6 games, which is unbeknownst to Pirate fans since probably the late 1950s,
the
to be
beginning
honest.
of time.
Yeah. And Galena has a balance of talent and size coming up with a junior-dominated team led by some key seniors. The biggest question is, when will we see Galena get on the positive side of the win-loss record?
Right. I mean, I feel like we keep having the same conversation every year.
It seems like it.
It seems like it. And we always make the comments, the conference would be better if Galena was up against the top.
And you're not wrong there.
No, because a couple old school guys sitting here, we're used to Galena being a powerhouse. And, you wonder if this is the year they can get back to it. But, something that I kind of even inch forward a little bit more. I mean, this is such, like you said, a junior-dominated team. These 6 games could really play effective going into next year, even more so than this year.
Right, and you're not wrong in that fact. I mean, when you take a look at what we identified last week, what the 2021 spring season looks like, it's basically a good option to get your seniors on the field, get them the games that they absolutely deserve to play, but at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to see what you have coming up for the 2021 fall season with your juniors and sophomores and potentially freshmen to be sophomores, to kind of formulate what you're going to put forward for a team for that 2021 season when we hopefully get back to a normal state and can compete for a state championship again.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It almost has like that, that spring training camp feel in a way. You want your seniors to get the playing time they deserve, and some of those kids still need a little game film tape as well. But when you're not playing for anything, I'm sorry, I look at these games kind of meaningless in the sense of they're exhibition games because they don't mean a darn thing in the standings. I mean, if you want a 6-win conference title banner to hang, so be it. But this really is a great opportunity going into next year to build.
Well, and you're not wrong. Okay, so we've seen quite a few teams discuss the opportunity to play for conference titles. And when opposers come up and say, well, we're only playing 6 games. Yeah, you're only playing 6 games, but guess what? You still get to play for a conference title. That still means something. And it means something to a lot of schools, right? Don't get me wrong. But at the same token, when you're in the NUIC and you're constantly playing for state championships, it takes a little bit of level away from you.
It's like you kind of got to bring your level of intensity down a little bit to be like, oh, we're playing for a conference title.
Right. Exactly.
And that's how I feel. I do. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't care about a conference title. I don't.
And a lot of insiders who are known to the NUIC and the level of play that the NUIC brings on a year in and year out basis would agree with that notation. But at the same token, a conference championship, even in the NUIC, is still very valuable because, as we've seen over the course of the years, teams that win the NUIC conference title are probably going to do what?
Correct, and that's where we're going to get to. I mean, you're going to God forbid one of these teams that we don't see coming happens to win the conference. You mark my words, we're going to win state this year.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's unique and it's kind of cool in a way because nobody can really take it away from you. I mean, you won the conference. We don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs.
Exactly. And when you take a look at Galena, they're returning a lot of yardage considerably compared to the rest of the NUIC. They have 2,288 yards career coming back, and that is led by senior Peyton Bauer. And we've heard, of course, the Bauer name over the years between his older brothers that have played before him. But he brings back 835 yards rushing with 6 touchdowns. He was second-team all-conference running back and a second-team all-conference linebacker just a season ago. You add into there Sam Hesselbacher, who was an honorable mention all-conference wide receiver, 235 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. You bring back a second-team all-conference lineman like Gabe Garcia, who was just a sophomore last year, earning that honor, so he's going to be an incoming junior. And then you bring back the playmaker in Julio Mastazuma, who, while his stats don't look big, the level of play he brought was big. And he had 311 yards rushing with just 2 touchdowns and 2 yards receiving. But you could see that he is definitely a difference maker for the Pirates in this offense. You bring back another guy in Calvin Quick, who didn't have a whole lot of yards at the varsity level, but can bring a good impact moving out of the fresh soft level into that varsity level. And then you add in certain guys like Connor Bear, who was up with varsity last year, Will Knack, and Ethan Heffel. Ethan Heffel was huge last year at QB. We've watched him play against Du-Pec, who made the playoffs, in Durand, and he had a big game. Galena almost upset Du-Pec in that game despite finishing 2-7, and we saw what Du-Pec did. They made it at least to the second round of the 3A playoffs before losing to eventual state runner-up Byron. But had they not played Byron in the second round, who knows how far Du-Pec would have gotten that 3A playoff.
Right, and then on the other side of the ball, I mean, the defensive linebackers, you know, all these guys you listed, I mean, they were pretty much returning close to everybody.
You're right. With Bauer, Mastazuma, Calvin Quick coming back, Jarrett Baston's coming back, and Jarrett Baston's a guy who you can split off into a fullback or tight end type position. If needed, you can move him into an offensive line position. And then you add in other players like Ryan Holland, Brady Shemahorn, Brian Luna, and you got a list of folks: Clay Folks, Kevin Trinidad, Justin White, Jacob Townsend, Caleb Bradshaw. Do these names kind of sound like a resemblance of Galena days of old to you?
Right, they do. And I mean, you know, like you said, they return a lot. I would not be surprised if, you know, the Pirates do have a break-even or even potentially slightly better than break-even year.
Yeah. I mean, we had the Pirates slated at 2-4 for the season. 2-4 seems like a mark that is respectable.
It is.
But at the same token, can we see Galena become 3-3, 4-2? There's a good possibility for it.
I do too.
And, you know, like you stated right at the beginning, when are the Pirates going to return to the level of play that we expect to see that really we've seen out of the last 35 years of Galena Pirate football but haven't seen over the last 4 seasons? When's that going to return? When will Coach Freed bring that back? I know Coach Freed wants it back. When's it going to return is the question.
And we'll wait to find out.
Shane, we move on to the Dakota Indians, who finished 4-5 in the regular season and 3-3 in the North Division. Dakota missed out on the playoffs by a game while suffering close losses to West Carroll, Orangeville, and Stockton. They will have a good blend of returning experience mixed with some newcomers, but will have a tough schedule in front of them with 5 playoff teams on their schedule. One of those being Du-Pec, who they actually did beat in the regular season last season. Do you think that the Indians can build on their returning experience, or will they take a step back this spring?
Yeah, like you said, the schedule's real tough. Some you didn't note on, though, that 5 shrinks down to 4 now that the first week game is canceled with Forreston.
That's a good point.
Luckily for Dakota, though, I mean, that was going to be a hard game. I don't know. With a shortened schedule and the competition they're going to be playing, it's going to be hard for Dakota to stack wins this year, I think.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. I mean, the Forreston game, missing out in week 1 is a bad turn of events for football in general for the NUIC. As we can see, 2 notable programs in the NUIC not playing in week 1. However, it was Forreston who did create the issue. Dakota is taking a look at administrative presentation coming into the upcoming week to determine if they are technically available to play in week 1, which we don't know yet. So at this moment, both teams are unavailable to play in week 1, but we'll find out where that translates. But looking forward to Dakota, you take a look at the talent that they have coming back, which is experience level wise is a lot. But when you take a look at yard level wise and defense purpose wise, it's not a lot. Offensively, they only have 671 career yards coming back. And when you have players such as Quentin Heilmeyer, Caden Moyer, Jacob Kleckner, Cade Wills, Lucas Sutherland, and even Adam Thompson coming back, who Adam Thompson was only a sophomore last season, incoming junior, so didn't get a lot of playing time. You're looking at some guys there at the skills position that can create some offensive explosion for the Indians, as well as on the defensive side of the ball. You're looking at guys that can potentially be difference makers. You got Quentin Heilmeyer, who is a first-team all-conference punter. Cade Moyer was first-team all-conference defensive back. Then you have Jacob Kleckner, who was a second-team all-conference tight end. You add in Wales and Sutherland, who were key contributors to the Indians' offense and defense last season, and they got some things to build upon. And we got some guys on the both offensive and defensive lines that can help contribute there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Dakota does have quite a few nice pieces to go along. It's just whether it's going to be able to be put together. And, for how many years Dakota was known for having big, good lines, and then that kind of tapered off, and we went on a big stretch without hardly seeing them have any. And now that line play is kind of increased in size a little bit this year. It's just whether or not they're going to have anything to go with it as far as getting some yards.
Right. And, I mean, you take a look at some of the linemen that are returning. You have Dalton Riggle, who has been a 2-year / soon-to-be somewhat 3-year starter. I mean, he's played on and off as a sophomore, was definitely a starter as a junior, will be a starter as a senior. You add in Martin Snyder, Jack Thomas, who is an incoming junior, who did start last year as a sophomore. You add in juniors to be in Ian Ace and Luke Taylor, who were able to get some playing time as sophomores, including Colton Rao. And like you said, you have the size there. How are you developing that size to help make your team formidable on the lines? And that's where Dakota suffered a lot, especially in recent years, is, you go back to 2015, they had a very explosive team, a very good athletic team, but they tried to run the ball through lines that couldn't be ran through.
Yeah.
And then you had the athletes, but you didn't exploit what they could do. Now you have not a whole lot of athletes, but you have size to where you can actually explode through some holes and make some openings, but you need to have the explosion to go with it on the skill side as well.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, you're going to have the line play. It's just they're going to need somebody to step up and really have a big year for them to do anything, I think.
Right. I mean, so when you take a look at that line play, you need that line play to be able to sustain the line in itself. In order to open up holes, provide pass protection.
Well,
and
that's just it too.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not used to seeing this offense. I mean, it's been a couple years in the works now, but it's not the traditional lineup and the ground and pound games that we're used to seeing out of Dakota anymore. That has changed completely.
Well, that's just it, and especially now with offensive coordinator Britton Kaufman stepping back from calling plays. I mean, you're taking out a offensive coordinator who was a 3-time state champion as a coach of the Dakota Indians. He is stepping away from the program.
Right.
And you're getting away from what was Dakota football. And now you're going to start implementing what you feel is the right thing to do. And I don't necessarily disagree with Coach Free. We got to be able to, or the Indians have to be able to spread out the play. To exploit the athletes that they have, but with the size of the line that they have coming back, you got to take a look at what your options are as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because when this transition started, we live in Indian country. That's no secret. I mean, so we hear
Thanks for
things.
saving my ass on that.
I know. So we hear things. So I mean. Was it popular to change the offense at the time? Absolutely not. I mean, look what the history was. But look at what they had to deal with. What other options did you have? Are we going to line up and get stopped, or are we going to try and move the ball? I don't discredit that at all in the movement that was trying to be made. But now going into this year, do you stick with that movement, or do you go back to a ground and pound when you have a more formidable line?
Right, and that's great points. And you can argue it back and forth. I don't disagree with what Coach Free's trying to do. He's trying to become more explosive. Right. He's trying to bring back speed. He's trying to potentially spread it out a little bit, which is probably what Dakota at this point needs to do in order to have success. Will they have success is the key question. You still, even in a passing offense, need to have line play, both offensively and defensively. And right now, that is the biggest question for the Indians. And can they have that? And that's where our question remains. We move over to Rivermen Nation, where the Du-Pec Rivermen come in is our fourth team of coverage for the North preview, and Du-Pec finished the 2019 season at 7-4, going 3-3 in the North. They lost in the second round of the playoffs to Byron, 42-14. They made a quick entrance into the playoff scene in 2019, much like we saw out of EPC in their first couple years, 25 years ago. Making the playoffs in just their third season of the co-op, so it's kind of reminiscent of that. They bring back an explosive offense with a quick defense, but they need to improve the play on both sides of the line to be able to make a big splash as a conference and state player, which is what the Rivermen are hoping to do. With some skilled seniors and juniors and an exciting sophomore class, Du-Pec can really establish themselves as a big threat in the spring, provided that they have a great upside in the spring heading into this fall.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you talk, sitting here kind of brings me back to a couple years ago when this first started. And, we were hard, and, we heard a lot of things, and we said, you got to put in the time and the effort, and you build these programs from the ground up. They don't just happen, and you're finally getting to a time where the trees are starting to produce the fruit.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you take a look at Du-Pec. They're returning 4,235 yards offensively career, the second most amount out of any NUIC team coming back this year.
Behind Akron, right?
Yeah, correct. Behind Akron, who we talked about last week. And leading the charge is wide receiver and defensive back Gabe Howard. Gabe comes back with 752 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns. He was his first-team all-conference wide receiver, first-team all-conference defensive back. You bring in the likes of Trey Stifter, who brings back 533 yards receiving with 3 touchdowns. rushing with 3 touchdowns, 498 yards receiving with 6 touchdowns. So he's moving from the running back role to the wide receiver role. He was second team all-conference wide receiver just this season ago, second team all-conference DB. And then you bring in a junior gunslinger in Hunter Hoffman, who brings back the second most passing yards in the conference this year with 1,740 yards passing, 20 touchdowns. He adds 4 rushing touchdowns to that, and he was a first-team all-conference quarterback just a season ago as a sophomore. First-team all-conference.
I mean, everything's pretty much been as advertised. I mean, we kind of had our eyes on that for a couple of years now, and the first year getting him to see a little bit of playing time, and then bang, here it is. It's your team, so to speak. He's been everything that we were told he would be.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
been no surprises.
Exactly. You add in a guy like Tyler Kermazi, who is a first-team all-conference kicker. So now you're adding in some special teams to the depth of what Du-Pec can do. So not only are you providing a scoring threat offensively, you're providing a scoring threat in the special team side of the game,
right,
which, as we all know, at the 1A, 2A, 3A level, that's a pivotal game right there.
It is.
Bring in players like Trent Taylor, who has seen playing time as a running back with 467 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, and then move him to receiver where he's got 163 yards receiving and another 2 touchdowns. You bring back guys like Matt Nevdahl, Bryce Fitzengo, and then you're going to add in sophomore to be A.J. McCulhey, who the Rivermen expect to use as a running back / linebacker / defensive back. And while most people don't know what A.J. McCulhey brings to the Du-Pec Rivermen offense, we all know of his older brother from a few years ago, Griffin Mulcahy, and I can guarantee you that what you thought of Griffin Mulcahy, AJ is probably a little bit even higher than that as far as results and expectations.
Right, and I mean that bids well for the Rivermen.
Definitely. I mean, when you got an older brother like Griffin beating the crap out of you over the years, you might be a little more prone to be toughened up as well, and that goes with him being the youngest of the bunch.
Not to cut you off, but like the thing that gets me, and we talked about this last week, your upper teams. This is a team where you would have liked to have seen a full season in the playoffs, like we talked about last week. So this is kind of one of those things where you wish they had a full season in the playoffs to see what they were capable of. It's kind of sad that you don't have a postseason to really, because this is one of those teams where they're going to be good, but they can be even better by the end of the year, clicking on all cylinders going forward.
Well, and you're not wrong. I mean, you take a look at what Du-Pec did against Byron. You compare that competition against Lena Winslow from just a season ago. They were closer in competition with Byron than they were with Lena Winslow. And you got that against the 3A state champ, or 3A runner-up, versus the 1A state champ. And as we've said many times, how many people are going to take that 1A state champ against the 2A state champ? I am.
Well, last year for sure.
The 3A state champ. I am. How about the 4A class 4A state runner-up? Murfreesboro. I'm definitely taking Lena Winslow over at Murfreesboro. The only team I can see Lena Winslow having the trouble with over the last season was Richmond Burton in Class 4A, in my honest opinion. And that says a lot about the NUIC. We have known to develop a lot of great players over the course of time. And specifically, just in the last 4 seasons, now coming into our 5th season of covering the conference, we've seen a lot of players get exposed to Division I scouting, recruiting, either going Division I, going Division II, or at least landing Division III multiple offers, and then landing at Division III as well.
Yeah.
So that speaks a lot of volume there. When you take a look at the Rivermen, though, you're looking at adding in the likes of Matt Nevdahl, who we can potentially see being an addition to both the offensive and or defensive sides of the ball. You're looking at Bo Seaton, who could also spark that interest on both sides of the ball. Bailey Leaf is another guy who we have not even thought about. I tell you what, this kid, offensive line, defensive line, watch for him because he's coming. And he's only going to be a junior, and the kid is going to be lights out. You add in seniors to be in Nick Utman and Alex Grimmett, and guys like Jake Anderson, who's going to be an incoming junior, who's getting a lot of looks as well from being exposed at different camps. Brock Dornick, John Baker, Brian Green, who's going to be an incoming sophomore, Drake Fortson, who's coming in as a wide receiver and defensive back as a junior. They got a lot of upside potential here, and you take a look at this junior, senior, and then what you have in the senior class, and there's a lot of excitement for the Rivermen here.
There is, and a couple of those games that you really going to want to catch are when they play Akron and Winslow. I mean, those are going to be realistically your top matchups every week when those two teams meet.
Yeah, so I mean, granted, they're going to play all of their home games at Rockford Auburn on Saturday afternoons at 11 o'clock, and that first game is against the Akron Bulldogs. Week 6, Lena Winslow. Who's to say that if they get Akron in week 1, they have Stockton in week 2, Dakota week 3, Orangeville in week 4. They have a lot of good competition here. And then you got EPC in week 5. So they're not playing no-namers their first 6 weeks at all.
The schedule's loaded.
Their schedule is loaded, and it's going to provide us with an opportunity to see what the Rivermen are for 2021, but what they can be heading into the fall of 2021. Our next stop takes us to Stockton, where the Blackhawks were 7-4 just a season ago, 4-2 in the North Division. They lost in the second round to Nemesis Akron, 27-18. Obviously, Stockton was able to keep the playoff atmosphere alive under Coach Jesse Snyder, but now that the Hawks will turn to Matt Lightson to lead the charge, a former player and assistant coach for the Blackhawks, he's going to bring back the opportunity to get the Blackhawks to a level that hopefully will transpire into something more. Obviously, Lightson has led the West Carroll Thunder to the playoffs just a season ago for the third time in his 5 seasons coaching there, which, as you know, the West Carroll Thunder have not been a very formidable playoff program, but what he has been able to do with the Thunder over that season bodes well for what Stockton has bringing back. They obviously bring back a lot of experience at skilled positions, but it's the offensive and defensive lines that they're going to need to develop to allow them the availability to have the space to make things happen.
Yeah, and like you said, they do return a lot. I mean, you're looking at 6 kids. They got accolades on the all-conference team. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, obviously, we've seen several different offenses over the years out of the Blackhawks between Coach O'Boyle and then Coach Fox and then what's his name?
Snyder.
No, before Snyder.
Thornton.
Coach Thornton.
God, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. And how could we forget Coach Thornton? Because he's like top 15.
Yeah, I know, right? It happens.
He's like top 15 in the coaching wins. But you've seen different aspects of what Stockton can do offensively. And obviously, Coach Lightson, growing up under Coach O'Boyle, being a player for him, and then coaching under Coach Fox, knows what the wing T system is. Spreading out and becoming his own coach and having to develop things at West Carroll, he has taken a liking to the spread offense. You bring back 3,841 yards, and with that, you bring back the conference rushing leader in Jason Herman with 1,798 yards and 16 touchdowns, who happened to be a first-team all-conference running back. And then you bring back some formidable guys with him. Case Harmston, who was a second-team all-conference offensive line, also a first-team all-conference linebacker. You bring back Andrew Haas, who was an honorable mention all-conference defensive back, but doubled as a running back. You have Jaden Rice, who was a first-team all-conference defensive back. Austin Chumbler, who was first-team all-conference utility, used primarily as a wide receiver / defensive back. Gavin Kiefer at tight end and defensive line. And then you have your running mates in Hunter Hilly and Wyatt Rabb potentially. Hunter Hilly has 681 yards returning with 8 touchdowns. Definitely a starter and a force in the Stockton offense just a season ago. He has 2 touchdowns in the receiving game. And then Wyatt Rabb, who has 143 yards rushing with 4 touchdowns as well. The biggest question is, who's going to be quarterback for the Blackhawks?
Right, that is. And, that's something that they're going to have to rely on heavily. And, watching Herman run last year was kind of really unique in its own way. It seemed like anytime he thought he'd get down, there it is squirting away.
You're not wrong, because he doesn't have the structure, the frame that you'd be like, oh yeah, that guy's running for a lot of yards tonight. But he made it happen on a nightly basis. And I think a lot of that goes into the fact that, you had Andrew Haas and you had Hunter Hilly in the offensive backfield with him steadily making those options happen. Now, the question at quarterback is, do you put Andrew Haas there at quarterback, take him out of a running back role, or do you go with Caleb Mimosa, who was the sophomore QB last year? Obviously, he had 5 yards rushing with a touchdown at the varsity level, but what can he bring forward to the varsity this year? Yeah. Is he good enough to take over that role?
Well, I think so. That's generally what you're going to do. Bringing that younger quarterback on a team that is literally loaded. We're talking about a Blackhawks team that, what did I say, 6 conference. This isn't like the days where they were in the upstate. Not to bash the upstate teams, but let's be honest here, it was easier. Not easier, but you were more.
No, it was easier. You're not wrong.
It was easier to make all conference in the upstate than it was the Northwest. This is a Stockton team that's now in the North. You're in the Big Daddy of the Big Daddy conference, and you got all these kids that are getting the recognition they deserve. This is a loaded team.
Yeah, and you add in different guys. So you have Bryce Smith, Casey Rowe, Brady Brocious, Hunter Allen, guys that you can bring in that can add an added touch to the offensive line, tight end positions, defensive line positions, and then you add in other fill-ins in Nathan Coffey and Austin Eisweiler that can potentially fill in significant roles for the Blackhawks as well. So while Lightson is taking over the role for Snyder, we still have an opportunity to see the Blackhawks really not fall far off from where they were. In fact, this season we have them listed at 5-1, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I don't want to bash anybody here, but the Stockton Blackhawks schedule is very, very Stockton friendly. You don't play the likes of Lena Winslow. You play Dakota, Galena, AFC East, Dubuque, Milledgeville. Those are games where you should be taking care of business. And then it sets you up with that matchup with Du-Pec.
Right. And, it's kind of funny that you say that, because in the past you look at teams like
I know, it's hard to say.
Galena and Dakota and Milledgeville, and those are teams that you're like, oh yeah, those are going to be big games when you look at the NUIC of the past. But now you're looking at week 2, and you're like, Du-Pec? Well, we found out real quick who Du-Pec is, and they're no longer Du-Pec. It's Du-Pec. You're playing Du-Pec, and you know that you're playing Du-Pec. Right. And that week 2 game, like you said, that's a key matchup for the Blackhawks.
That's their game of the year, really.
I'm
looking at the schedule. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see. But 5-1, I would not be. That game they could be 6-0. You never know.
Right. And you're not wrong there, because that week 2 matchup with Du-Pec is going to be in Stockton. As we've
Good luck with
identified.
that.
Yeah, we've identified over the years that Stockton is obviously a hard place to play, but also a very favorable place to play when you're the home team, when you're the Blackhawks. So, the saying never goes. When you're the visiting team playing in Stockton, you got to be up by 2 touchdowns or more. And to somewhat, that still holds true to a degree, but we've kind of seen that tail back with the whole IHSA taking control of what refs enter those games as far as the playoff atmosphere is considered. But that is going to be, like you said, a key game, a fun game to watch, no doubt. Our next team is the Orangeville Broncos, where Orangeville comes back from a 7-4 season where they went 4-2 in the North. They lost in the second round to Galena Winslow 52-8. Obviously, Orangeville made the playoffs for the third straight year for the second time in school history, being led by Coach Jay Doyle. This time, Coach Jay Doyle is stepping down. Assistant Coach Steve Snyder, is taking over for the Broncos in the 2021 season. The Broncos are going to feature a lot of returning starters while making some slight changes to their positions. But this will be the last year in 11-man football for the Broncos as they get set to be one of the 5 teams moving to 8-man football this fall.
Yeah, another one bites the dust, so to speak, really.
That, and we have another coaching change upon us.
We do. There's been a lot.
Yeah.
It's one of those things we talk about, kind of. We saw this coming a few years ago, really, that Orangeville was going to be getting to that point. And, the day of reckoning for 11-man football is here, and a lot of schools are falling into it.
It's not so long ago that we heard the rumor of Orangeville having only 7 boys playing football between 7th and 8th grades. And so, like you stated, it was a matter of time, basically, to determine what was going to happen. Unfortunately, for the Broncos in this season, this was going to be another potential playoff experience for the Broncos, which could have potentially culminated in their 4th straight playoff appearance, which would have been the first time in school history. They return almost 2,500 yards of career offense, and they have key players returning. And Chase Jordan, who was a second-team all-conference running back, he's the second leading rusher in the conference coming back with 1,467 yards and 16 touchdowns. You add in another player like Zach Baker, who was a first-team all-conference tight end, second-team all-conference punter, and although he didn't get it, he probably could be in the honorable mention team or second conference team for tight end or defensive line as well. When you take a look at Cade Janicki, here's a guy who is first-team all-conference offensive line and first-team all-conference linebacker, and the Broncos are going to move him to fullback to take over for Garrett Rodabaugh in their offense. So basically taking them from, hey, you're a first-team all-conference lineman, we're going to move you to fullback this year. Which is probably exactly. And that's exactly the mentality that Cade has. Whatever you need, coach. And that's awesome. And that's probably where the Broncos need to utilize the most. Taking a look at some linemen, you have Chase Bowen and Jared Stubby returning on both the offensive and defensive lines, of which both guys were part of the defensive line all-conference team, Chase being an honorable mention team member on the D-line, and Jared being a second-team all-conference member on the D-line. Then you bring back some players as well that weren't all-conference players, but they're very suitable for the Bronco offensive defense, and Jake Doyle at quarterback and DB, Carson Rote, and Gunnar Lobdell at running back and D-back. And then you have Ryan Guy and Ethan Fulgate that are going to come back on the offensive line.
Right. And, for a team like Orangeville, the list is short. I mean, they do return a lot as far as, key players from last year or now a year and a half ago at this rate.
Right.
But the list is real short of key returners for Orangeville, and that's going to be something interesting to watch as far as the Broncos go. I mean, depth is going to be an issue for the Broncos, and obviously, we talked about the 8-man going to that, and obviously depth is an issue. So the Broncos need to stay healthy. I mean, it's as simple as that.
It is. And I mean, you take a look at Orangeville going to, like you said, going to 8-man. They're going to become another formidable team going to 8-man football from the NUIC. So that's going to provide another layer of depth to the 8-man football league out of the NUIC. Hopefully that can matriculate into a potential NUIC conference at some time in 8-man football, which would give us a bigger, broad depth of how great our NUIC conference is, especially considering the fact that in 2019 we saw Lena Winslow win the 11-man state championship, bringing home a 4th straight state title for the NUIC, but we also watched the Polo Marcos bring home the 8-man state
I was
championship.
just going to say, your polo, stay away. You
Yeah.
guys stay in 11. We like it down here. We're the best, but, it's way of the times.
It is, and to be honest, you obviously did not partake in some of the games that we went to last season, but me and Carrie were able to pick up some of the 8-man games with Polo and River Ridge specifically, and that was a lot of fun actually, and it provides still that same level of excitement because it does create more of an environment around. You have to have skill players to play 8-man football, and while 8-man football is unconventional and some people are not, what do we want to call
accepting of it?
Yes. It's still a very fun game to watch, especially if you like to watch a game where teams are going to score in bunches. And that is really exciting about the 8-man game.
It's a poor man arena football.
In a way, it is. But at the same time, it really exploits your playmakers.
Yep.
And, good job for Orangeville. They stood up for themselves, like a lot of these teams going to 8-man football. They want to keep playing under their school moniker, and you can't blame them for that.
No, you can't. But on the other hand, you can kind of blame some of the teams that didn't really accept them opening. I mean, where you already see some of these co-ops happen. Taking on a team like Orangeville and making a co-op wouldn't have been a bad deal.
No, you're right. And, it's one of those conversations that I've had with several people, including yourself, and you take a look at what some of these teams could offer. And a team like Orangeville, I mean, if you're not accepting them in a co-op, you're missing out on at least a defensive back that's going to start for you, a running back most likely that's going to start for you, potentially an offensive lineman that's going to start for you, and maybe on the off chance a quarterback that's going to start for you. And then you turn around on the other side of the ball, you got a defensive lineman, a linebacker, and a DB that may not be potential starters for you that, while if you would have accepted that co-op, yeah, it may boost you into an upper class, but with all these teams exiting into the 8-man arena, that's only going to push up that cutoff line for the 1A through 8A classes that are currently 11-man football.
Even at that rate, I mean, how much success have we seen this conference have in 2A? I mean, what are you running from?
Yeah, exactly.
If you're, in fact, that's a reason behind it. I mean, Orangeville already co-ops with Dakota for wrestling. I won't touch on it, but that would have been okay as far as football goes.
And you're not far off. I mean, we've talked about it over the last 4 years.
You're close.
You take your 1A champion against your 2A champion, who's winning? More times than not.
Right, you're 1A.
You take your 1A champion against at least your 3A state runner-up, who's winning?
Yeah.
More times than not.
And it's not close.
Yeah. It's not close.
So, I don't know.
And I've had this conversation with another coach from the area, too, about a team that was considered a super team. And they agreed. I had another conversation with another coach who also agreed the same. And I tell you what, it's not far off from the truth. When you have other coaches that are competing against these teams who know what's going on around the state at the same time, and they're telling you who can beat who, and we're sitting here telling you these things, and you guys laugh at us. I'm telling you, Orangeville going into Chicago, play Chicago Hope. Everybody laughed at us. We did pick Chicago Hope to win, but ultimately Orangeville shut out Chicago Hope. Who's laughing now? The NUIC's laughing. That's who. And that's where we're at. And it's going to be great to see a little bit of a split. We're going to have a 10-man conference. We're going to have an 8-man conference. 8-man football conference, I mean. 8-man football conference, sorry. With a 10-man conference and 11-man football. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to see a lot of that going on. It'll be cool to see state champions at both levels of the game. Our last stop of the evening takes us to Galena Winslow, where we go to the home of the defending state champions. Galena Winslow finished the 2019 season 14-0, going 6-0 in the north. They won the state championship over Moweek with Central A&M 58-20, creating their 10th running clock of the season in what was one of the most dominating performances we have ever seen in NUIC history. Love it, like it, hate it, I don't care. That team was what we would call a super team.
You said it.
Coming
Sorry,
back.
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, that speaks for itself.
Hey, I'm just glad you agree. The
that
Panthers.
doesn't happen often.
I know. The Panthers dominated the 2019 season with their closest game being a 2-touchdown score against Anawan Wethersfield in that semifinal matchup, of which they were up 30-6 at halftime. So really, was it a 2-game score? By the final, yes. If you were there, you would know. They do graduate a large portion of that piece of dominance, but they still bring back a large amount of playmakers into this team, including future Iowa Hawkeye Jennings Dunker. And with that, Galena Winslow won't look as powerful as what we saw the last time they took the field, but they are still arguably one of the best teams, if not the best team in Class 1A. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see all of that play out this season. One of the big questions this season will be who's going to be under center at quarterback, with the addition of a senior QB out of a perennial suburban power in Warrenville Central, and that player is Mr. Evan England. So, who's going to start? Evan or your state championship junior returning quarterback in Luke Benson?
Really not a question. Me personally, I don't know how you can move him off of it. But if you do, I guess there's really no wrong pick here. I mean,
there's not. It's just like you said. It's where are you going to put who and where?
Yeah, what are you going to do with Benson though if you move him off quarterback?
Right. So you move Benson off quarterback, you're potentially hurting his chances to develop for what will be his senior year.
That's just it. Yeah.
Evan is already committed to play quarterback at Loras College, which is excellent. Good for him. At the same token, you want to make sure he can get some repetitions in to help him develop for what will be his freshman year of college.
Right. I don't think that's going to be an issue, though, because his team is good enough that there's going to be garbage time. Personally, I'm not a Hall of Fame coach here. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. But how do you not keep Benson there, knowing that as a senior, this team can still play for a state championship?
Exactly, especially when you got guys like Mari Roby returning, who is also going to be on that team come this fall. And Mari returns 877 yards rushing with 9 touchdowns. He's explosive in the passing game, where he had 227 yards receiving last season with 5 touchdowns. He was noticed as a first-team all-conference running back as a sophomore, and he happens to just be the younger brother of Ravion and Ronnie Valentine. I don't know if you heard of those guys.
No.
But, you add in that, and then, this season you're going to bring back Jensen Block, too, who returns as a first-team all-conference defensive back. You're going to bring back Cole Gerber as an honorable mention all-conference linebacker, who we also look to transition into a two-way player on the offensive line. You have Jack Statterstrom returning at fullback and linebacker, and he brings back 791 yards rushing with 6 touchdowns and a receiving touchdown in that. And then you're going to add in guys like Tristan Rude, who only has 46 yards rushing in his career, but he was a starting linebacker last year on a state championship team. He's coming back. And then you're bringing back other guys like Carter Burke, Maddox Sargent, who was a starter as a sophomore on the offensive line, Connor Edge, who's going to be an incoming senior, who had a lot of playing time on the offensive and defensive lines. You're going to have Tyler Croat in there as well. And then you add in other contributors with Noah White, Ethan Five, Brady Eilders. Names that you're used to hearing when you're talking about Lena Winslow Panther football. And it's not a surprise when you take a look at the amount of success that Lena Winslow has had. When you go back to when Coach Aaron took over the program in 1997, they have one miss in the playoffs, which we are very adamant about talking about, and that was 1998. They went 6-3. They missed out because that was still the old six-class system.
Yeah.
You fast forward 4 years, and they're in the playoffs every single year of Coach Aaron's time running the Panther program.
Yeah, I mean, what do you say? Other than this team is a classic Lena Winslow team. I think personally, you have some holes, but they're always filled.
And that's what I like about what you just said. There's so many times where we've looked at Lena Winslow over the years, we're like, yeah, Lena Winslow's not going to be anything coming back this year. And all of a sudden, you get to week 6, week 7, week 8, and they're right there in the thick of things, and you're like, where the hell did this team come from? And then all of a sudden, they're making a quarterfinal run, and you're like, oh, man, they could make it to state.
And they do. And they win.
More times than that.
2013?
Yeah. 2013, they made it as a 6-3 team into the playoffs and ended up winning state. 2014 was another team that, a bad luck call with a bad luck fumble by a freshman at the time, who later went on to be one of the best running backs in conference history.
That was against Galena.
It was against Galena.
Yep.
And here's the problem with that, or I shouldn't say problem. Here's the situation with that. It's no longer a problem because we know who the state champion was that year. But you take a look at that situation. You called the play that was supposed to, or should have been called, not supposed to be called, should have been called. And you run the ball, you get the first down, you run out the clock. You're in that semifinal against Forreston where who's had the most dominance between Lena Winslow and Forreston over the years?
Right.
It's heavily favored to Lena Winslow. Lena Winslow potentially wins that game. We're talking about a back-to-back state championship in 2013 and 14. And then in 2015, we're talking about a team that gets to be the number 1 ranked team in state before they bow out with an undefeated record in the second round of the playoffs to an Oregon team that we weren't expecting to do much, of which they did. They lost the very next week to an Ottawa Marquette team that made a surprising run to the semifinals. And ironically, it's still a game that we talk about to this day, and a season that we still talk about to this day as well.
A lot of weird things have happened. I mean, there's no better way to put it. We saw a 5-4 Oregon team go beat EPC back in 2012. I guess it would have been, because the 2013 team lost to Sterling Newman, and then the 2014 team won. So 2012, you had a 5-4 team. Oregon
first
go
round.
to EPC.
Undefeated.
And, knock them off. So stranger things have happened. But make no mistake, this is a loaded Lena Winslow team that should really have no problem getting to where we see them getting. But that game with Du-Pec will be a good one, as well as that Orangeville game could be a good one to watch to see where the Broncos are as well.
I agree. So obviously, Lena Winslow has failed to put together a Week 1 game. It's no lost secret that Lena Winslow has never had a Week 1 game this entire upcoming season, but they have desperately tried to schedule a Week 1 game with no results. And as of right now, Coach A and his staff are still looking for a potential suitor to cover that Week 1 game potential as well. Granted, the IDPH probably has a little bit of saying around that and what they want to do there. But with that, like you said, Lena Winslow's looking at a great season, and Orangeville is going to be a great test to that, and Du-Pec at the end of the season as well.
And there is a team with a Week 1 opening not too far from Lena Winslow, so strap them up, play them twice.
I don't disagree. We have to see what happens. Obviously, that team is going to go through administration next week to see what their determination is. And I can't say that Coach A probably hasn't already reached out to that said team. So we'll see what happens. That gives you a look at our North Division summary for our opening dialogue into the 2021 spring season. And we covered a lot of basics here. Obviously, we expect the North Division to be the superior division over both sides of the conference once again here in 2021. Not by course of who's better and who, but it's just the simple factor of who's returning who, as that becomes a general staple. We're obviously identified some teams that could create some noise that we may see as unexpected right now, such as East Dubuque and Galena, potentially Amboy making some noise as well. Maybe even Milledgeville with some of the experience that they have coming back. But it'll be interesting to see what some of these teams can do. Will some of these top runners that we're used to seeing at the top kind of stumble and fall their way backwards as well? That's another question that we didn't necessarily topple into, but when we take a look at like the top 6, 7 teams in the conference, they return a lot of staples from what they had a season ago when they were making playoff runs. So obviously, out of general consideration, you expect them to pick up where they left off, so to speak.
Right, and I mean, speaking of years past, I mean, it hasn't been very often, if at all, that we've really toted a team and then to see them kind of fall off. I mean, over the years that this has been going on, I mean, it's pretty much, you don't want to say spot on, but here it is. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever had a team where this is your top team and then they don't show up. Like, I don't think that has occurred once.
No, I think our closest team to that would have been EPC in 2016 because we kind of had EPC, I think, slated at 3-4 or 4-5, and they surprised us at 8-1.
Right, and that's but to go backwards, we haven't really seen that.
No. Typically, when we're taking a look at what we're breaking down, the teams that we see at the top tend to end up at the top. Yeah. It's typically those middle run teams are where we start to see some of the disparity. I mean, last year we called Du-Pec either a 4-5 team or a 6-3 team, and they went 6-3. They earned a first round game. They got that first round game, they won it, and then they lost in the second round to create a 7-4 environment. But when you take a look at it, they finished 4th in the North Division. They even lost to the 5th team in the North Division in Dakota. So that goes to speak to the parity that we've talked about. I mean, you take a look at like West Carroll even. West Carroll was in the playoffs just a season ago. They finished behind EPC in the South Division. West Carroll went to the playoffs, and they damn near upset the number 1 seed in the Class 2A state playoffs, who ended up going to the semifinals before bowing out to the eventual state champion, which was the Sterling Newman Comets.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we do. I mean, we like this. And it's fun to see this all come out. I mean, it's on computer and everything else, and you put it on paper. But when the games are played, is when it's finally fun, and you see things shake out a little bit.
And that's exactly it. You know, we could sit here and we make our predictions, we make fun of it, in a good way to bring about entertainment and a good atmosphere for people to debate on. But at the same token, it still comes down to who's going to get on the field, who's going to play, who's going to surpass expectations. And really, when it's those teams that surpass expectations, that's what really brings out a lot of fun, because it is a joy to watch kids put in more and get more out of what they expect. And that's really what this is about. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to showcase our teams. We're trying to showcase our players. And it's awesome to see. And, you know, looking at this season, it's going to be tough. We're in 2021, which is a COVID season, no playoffs. But, you know, we're going to see a lot of great football, and I'm excited to see it get kicked off.
I agree.
So next week, we're going to bring you our Week 1 setup with who we break down team by team comparison with who we have going in Week 1, which is going to be very limited at this moment, but we will bring that to you and break down each of those competitions as we always do. So check in next week. As always, root for the NUIC.